The Origins of the British Empire, an extraordinary story of ambition, intrigue, and domination. What if I told you that the path to global supremacy wasn't forged through brute force alone? Welcome back to my channel, where today we unravel the intricate narrative of how Britain orchestrated its rise to become the most extensive empire in history. When we conjure images of great empires, civilizations like Rome, Persia, or the Ottomans often spring to mind. Yet none have left a legacy as profound as the British. Their reign, though less geographically expansive, touched almost every corner of the planet and continues to influence us in ways we often overlook. The question is, how did this seemingly small island nation achieve such dominance? How did Britain, an island with limited land and resources, amass the largest empire the world has ever seen? It's a tale that begins in the 15th and 16th centuries during the Age of Exploration. While Spain and Portugal plundered the riches of the Americas, the English, with fewer resources at their disposal, devised a different strategy. They opted for establishing vast trade networks instead of outright conquest. And nowhere was this more evident than in Asia. The British East India Company, founded in 1600, was a pioneer in this shift. Initially a trading enterprise, it soon evolved into a private empire. By the late 18th century, it wielded more power than many sovereign states, governing territories that dwarfed those directly controlled by the British Crown. At its peak, this single corporation ruled over more people than the entire British monarchy itself. Its governors appointed by the Crown held legislative and judicial powers. Its army, larger than some European armies, maintained order in its vast domains. Yet the East India Company's rise was not solely due to superior organization or trade acumen. It was significantly fueled by the deliberate introduction of addictive substances like opium into new markets. In the 19th century, British agents flooded China with opium, creating a massive market of addicts and draining Chinese silver into London's coffers. The Opium Wars that followed were not merely military conflicts. They were campaigns of financial and commercial warfare aimed at dismantling Chinese resistance to the trade. The wars resulted in British victories and expanded their spheres of influence. But perhaps most significantly, they demonstrated how Britain could dominate one of the oldest civilizations on Earth without ever fully conquering it. Further fueling Britain's rise was the transformation of London into the world's preeminent financial hub. During the 18th and 19th centuries, the City of London became the global banker. Insurance firms underwrote risky ventures, stock exchanges mobilized capital for expeditions and colonies, and wealthy families like the Rothschilds and Barings lent their fortunes to fund colonies and armies. It was a system that enabled the empire to expand relentlessly. However, the empire was not just built by traders and bankers. A crucial aspect of its growth was the deliberate spread of English education across its vast territories. Through schools and universities established in colonies, generations of local leaders, administrators, and intellectuals were trained in British systems of law, politics, and economics. By the time many of these regions sought independence, their leadership was often steeped in British systems, making the transition to self-rule relatively smoother. In India, for instance, the establishment of the British Raj in 1858 led to the creation of new administrative structures, legal codes, and educational institutions. These were designed not only to govern but to mold the Indian elite in the image of their British counterparts. The impact was profound. Leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru and Mahatma Gandhi, who spearheaded India's independence movement, were products of British education. They utilized British legal precedent and institutions to fight for Indian self-rule, showcasing the complex legacy of the empire. Meanwhile, another significant tool in Britain's arsenal was a policy known as divide and rule, particularly effective in regions like Africa. The British recognized that their colonial ambitions would face stiff resistance if local populations were united. Therefore, they deliberately fostered divisions among communities to prevent large-scale rebellions. In Africa, they drew borders that cut across tribal lines, pitting communities against each other and ensuring conflict would continue long after colonial rule ended. Similarly, in India, they played local princes against one another, supporting the ruler of one state against those of others, thereby preventing any substantial challenge to their authority. This policy ensured that while the British Empire remained strong, internal rivalries weakened potential threats, contributing to its longevity. However, what truly made Britain's dominance formidable was its mastery of communication and information. Long before the Internet, they harnessed the power of instant communication. By the mid-19th century, Britain had telegraph lines spanning its empire from Canada to India, Egypt to Australia. The ability to send information across the globe in minutes gave them an edge in trade, diplomacy, and military intelligence. For instance, the British government could dispatch troops to quell a rebellion in India before news of it reached London. This control over information and communication was a critical factor in maintaining and expanding the empire. Moreover, it is essential to acknowledge the role of sheer luck and timing. The Industrial Revolution, which began in Britain in the late 18th century, provided the empire with an unprecedented edge. The steam engine, the machine, tools, and iron production boomed, providing the empire with the means to project power on an unmatched scale. Additionally, favorable geopolitical circumstances played a part. While other European powers were engaged in numerous conflicts, Britain's relative isolation from mainland Europe allowed it to focus on expansion overseas. The Napoleonic Wars, for instance, which devastated much of Europe, barely affected Britain, giving it a financial advantage that bolstered its imperial ambitions. By the late 19th century, the British Empire stood at the zenith of its power. Queen Victoria, who reigned from 1837 to 1901, was aptly named the Empress of India, signifying her vast dominion. At the time, the empire encompassed a quarter of the Earth's landmass and a fifth of its population. It stretched from the frigid lands of Canada to the deserts of Africa, from the jungles of Southeast Asia to the shores of Australia. The sun truly never set on the British Empire. However, the empire's trajectory took a decisive turn with the onset of the 20th century. The two devastating world wars drained Britain's wealth and manpower. Additionally, growing nationalist sentiments in colonies led to calls for self-rule and independence. Between 1945 and 1967, almost all British colonies in Africa and Asia gained independence. By the mid-20th century, the British Empire, which had dominated global politics for over 4 centuries, was no more. Yet, despite its formal dissolution, its legacy and impact endure. The English language remains a global lingua franca. International banking and finance are still centered in London. Many former colonies utilize British-style law, government, and education systems. Some argue that while the empire's flags have been lowered, its influence persists, embedded in international finance, cultural norms, and global institutions. Today, as we analyze the remnants of the British Empire, it's crucial to recognize that its decline was not a sudden event, but the culmination of historical forces. The two world wars, the rise of nationalism, economic shifts, and changing global dynamics all played their part in bringing down one of the most extensive empires in history. Furthermore, understanding the nature of Britain's imperial rule is vital. Unlike some empires that emphasized extraction and subjugation, Britain's approach, particularly in its later years, was more nuanced. They introduced systems of governance, education, and infrastructure that, while intended to serve the empire's interests, did leave lasting impacts on the regions they controlled. However, these impacts were not uniformly positive. The deliberate introduction of addictive substances like opium, the exploitation of local resources, and the often exploitative labor practices cannot be overlooked. So here's the enigma that remains. Did Britain truly relinquish its empire, or did it simply morph into a more subtle, less visible form of global influence? Is the British Empire, despite its formal end, still with us today, operating in the shadows of international finance, cultural norms, and global affairs? And now I turn the question to you. Do you see the British Empire as a story of genius, strategy, and cultural exchange? Or do you view it primarily as a narrative of exploitation, control, and dominance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this journey into the hidden aspects of the British Empire fascinating, don't forget to hit the like button. If you'd like to explore more such untold historical tales, consider subscribing to my channel. Your support means the world to me. Thanks for watching.